They laughed when a homeless Navy SEAL bought a dead town, until his K-9 uncovered a deed powerful men would kill to hide. With only $800 left, former Navy SEAL Ethan Walker risked everything on a forgotten ghost town deep in the Montana mountains. Everyone called him a fool. But when his loyal German shepherd, Titan, began digging beneath an abandoned building, they uncovered a secret that would expose decades of betrayal, change countless lives, and reveal why someone was willing to burn an entire town to keep the truth buried. Before we begin, comment 1 if you'd never give up on what's right, or 0 if you think Ethan should have walked away, and tell us where you're watching from. The auctioneer struck the wooden gavel once. The sharp crack echoed through the aging county courthouse in western Montana, bouncing off faded pine walls that had witnessed generations of land sales, broken dreams, and quiet desperation. Sold. $800. The room fell silent for only a heartbeat, then the laughter began. Not loud enough to be cruel, not quiet enough to be kind. A few ranchers sitting near the back exchanged amused glances. One old man removed his hat and shook his head. "That poor fool just bought black briar." Another chuckled. "Should have burned $800 instead. At least he'd have stayed warm." A woman behind them sighed. Nobody's lived there in decades. The county clerk slid a weathered folder across the desk without bothering to hide his disbelief. "You understand this property is sold exactly as is." The man standing at the front nodded once. "I understand." His voice was calm. Too calm. Like someone who had already survived worse things than public humiliation. His name was Ethan Walker, 42 years old, former Navy SEAL, multiple combat deployments, 2 Purple Hearts, 1 Bronze Star, and now, homeless. The clerk cleared his throat. "There are no utilities." "I know. No county maintenance, I know. No guarantee the structures are safe, I know." The clerk hesitated. "You'll be completely alone out there." Ethan looked down at the folded deed before gently picking it up. "No." The clerk frowned. Ethan turned toward the courthouse doors. "My partner's waiting outside." The laughter started again. One rancher called after him. "Hope your partner knows how to fix ghosts." The room erupted once more. Ethan never looked back. Outside, the late autumn wind rolled down from the Rocky Mountains, carrying the scent of pine, frozen earth, and distant snow. Parked beneath a leafless cottonwood tree sat a faded blue pickup truck that had clearly seen better years. Its paint had peeled away under countless winters. Rust spread along the wheel wells. The camper shell had been patched with mismatched sheets of aluminum. Inside the cab, a large German shepherd immediately lifted his head. His ears stood tall. Amber eyes locked onto Ethan before the dog quietly pushed the passenger door open with practiced familiarity. "There you are." Ethan smiled for what felt like the first time all week. Titan stepped down carefully. Despite the gray beginning to spread around his muzzle, the retired military working dog still carried himself with unmistakable discipline. His broad shoulders remained powerful, every movement deliberate, every glance alert. He approached Ethan without excitement, without barking. Instead, he simply leaned the weight of his body against Ethan's leg, a habit he had developed years ago, long before either of them left the military, long before nightmares became part of everyday life. Ethan rested one hand on Titan's neck. "We own a town." Titan tilted his head slightly. "I know." The dog stared into Ethan's eyes for several seconds before looking toward the mountains, as though understanding exactly what those words meant. Home. Or at least, the possibility of one. Ethan opened the passenger door. Inside the truck lay nearly everything they still owned. One duffel bag, a sleeping bag, An old toolbox, several cans of soup, military medical records, Titan's service vest, a framed photograph wrapped carefully inside a towel. Nothing else. Everything that had once filled Ethan's life had disappeared piece by piece. First came retirement, then the nightmares, then the panic attacks. Construction jobs became impossible to keep. The loud sounds, the unexpected shouting, the smell of diesel fuel mixed with wet concrete. Each one could send him somewhere thousands of miles away, back to places he spent years trying to forget. Friends stopped calling. Bills piled higher. Eventually, his apartment disappeared too. The truck became home. Titan never complained. Not once. The old German Shepherd adapted to every parking lot, every rest stop, every freezing night without hesitation. He had done the same overseas, mission after mission. Only now the battlefield looked different. Ethan climbed behind the steering wheel. He unfolded the county map. One small red circle marked a place almost no one remembered. Blackbriar. Population unknown. He started the engine. The pickup protested with a long metallic groan before finally coming alive. Ready? Titan settled into the passenger seat. Eyes forward. Always forward. The road west twisted through towering mountain passes where evergreen forests stretched endlessly beneath gray skies. Snow clung stubbornly to the highest peaks. Rivers carved silver ribbons through deep valleys. Hours passed without another vehicle. The farther they drove, the quieter the world became. Near sunset, Ethan stopped beside an overlook. The valley below spread across miles of untouched wilderness. Titan jumped out first. He sniffed the cold air, then froze. His ears pointed toward the distant mountains, not toward wildlife, not toward another vehicle, toward something else, something too far away for Ethan to understand. What is it? Titan didn't move. His muscles remained perfectly still, watching, listening. Then, after nearly 30 seconds, he calmly returned to the truck. Ethan smiled. Guess we'll find out. Darkness settled quickly across the mountains. By the time they reached the old county road leading toward Blackbriar, headlights illuminated little more than broken pavement disappearing beneath weeds. A weathered wooden sign leaned sideways beside the entrance. Blackbriar Est. 1889. Several letters had fallen away decades earlier. The remaining wood looked ready to collapse. Ethan slowed the truck. The tires crunched across loose gravel. One abandoned building appeared, then another, then dozens. Old storefronts stood frozen beneath years of wind and snow. Windows were shattered, porches sagged. A rusted gas pump leaned beside an empty service station. An old church steeple pierced the fading evening sky. No lights, no voices, no smoke rising from chimneys. Only silence. Not peaceful silence. Heavy silence. The kind that settled deep inside your chest. Ethan parked beside what had once been the town's general store. He shut off the engine. For several seconds, neither he nor Titan moved. Finally, Ethan whispered, "So, this is home." Titan climbed from the truck. He slowly walked into the middle of the empty street. The cold mountain wind lifted the fur along his back. His nose worked carefully, not searching, remembering, or perhaps recognizing. He turned once toward the abandoned buildings, then toward the dark tree line surrounding Blackbriar. Finally, his eyes settled on a lonely structure nearly half a block away, an old brick building with faded lettering barely visible above its entrance. Blackbriar Land Office. Titan stared, longer than seemed natural, long enough that Ethan noticed. "What do you see, buddy?" The German Shepherd didn't bark, didn't growl, didn't move. He simply watched, as if something beyond those weathered walls had been waiting a very long time for someone to finally come home. Behind them, hidden high among the pines overlooking the valley, another vehicle quietly rolled to a stop. Its headlights remained off. Someone inside watched the old pickup enter town, watched the veteran, watched the dog. And then, the engine quietly disappeared into the darkness before Ethan ever knew they had been seen. The silence returned so completely that it almost felt alive. Ethan stood beside his old pickup, his breath drifting into the freezing Montana air. Snow rested on the distant peaks like white fire beneath the moonlight, while the empty streets of Blackbriar stretched ahead in perfect stillness. Titan remained fixed on the abandoned land office. His ears stood forward. His body was relaxed, but his eyes never left the building. "You've got that look," Ethan said quietly. Titan finally turned toward him. "Tomorrow." Ethan rested a hand on the dog's shoulder. "We'll check it out tomorrow. For tonight, survival came first." The old general store leaned slightly to one side, its front windows shattered decades earlier. A faded sign still hung above the porch by one rusted chain, swaying gently whenever the mountain wind passed through town. Ethan pushed the front door. It refused to move. He pushed harder. With a loud groan, the swollen wood finally surrendered, releasing a cloud of dust that sparkled in the flashlight beam. The air smelled of old timber, dry earth, and forgotten years. Shelves still lined the walls. Most had collapsed. Broken glass covered the floor. An antique cash register rested upside down behind the counter, frozen exactly where someone had left it many decades before. "This'll do." Titan stepped inside first. Just as he had done clearing buildings overseas, he moved room to room without making a sound. His nose searched every corner, every doorway, every shadow. Finally, he returned and sat beside Ethan. Clear, safe. Ethan smiled. "Guess we're home." He unrolled his sleeping bag near the old stone fireplace. There was no wood left inside, no electricity, no running water. Only four walls that still managed to keep out most of the wind. Compared to sleeping inside the pickup, it almost felt luxurious. Outside, snowflakes began drifting from the night sky. Tiny, quiet, gentle. Titan curled beside the sleeping bag. His head rested across Ethan's boots. The familiar weight brought comfort that words never could. Ethan closed his eyes. For several minutes, there was peace. Then came the sound. Rotor blades, the sharp crack of gunfire, someone shouting coordinates over the radio. Smoke, fire, another explosion. Ethan's eyes flew open. His breathing turned fast and uneven. His hands searched instinctively for a rifle that wasn't there. His heart pounded so violently he could hear it. The old store disappeared. For one terrible moment, he was back overseas, frozen, unable to separate memory from reality. A warm nose gently touched his wrist. Once. Twice. Then Titan pressed his entire body against Ethan's chest. The German Shepherd remained perfectly calm. No barking, no panic, only quiet pressure, a signal they had practiced years ago with military behavioral specialists. "Come back. Stay here. You're safe." Slowly, very slowly. The sounds inside Ethan's mind faded. His breathing steadied. The shattered store returned. The broken shelves, the cracked ceiling, the moonlight through broken windows. "I'm here." His voice barely rose above a whisper. "I'm here." Titan licked the back of Ethan's hand once before settling beside him again. Neither of them slept much after that. Morning arrived wrapped in pale gold sunlight spilling over the Rocky Mountains. The abandoned town looked completely different beneath daylight. Still broken, still empty, but somehow less frightening, more patient, as though Blackbriar had simply been waiting. Ethan walked outside carrying an old crowbar from his toolbox. The general store's roof sagged dangerously over the front entrance. If this place is going to stand another winter. He looked upward. We've got work to do. Titan followed him from building to building as Ethan searched for usable lumber. Several nearby cabins had collapsed completely. Others still held solid beams beneath years of decay. By noon, Ethan had managed to reinforce part of the general store's porch and patch one section of roof using reclaimed timber. Then it happened. Hammer, nail, hammer, nail, hammer. The sharp metallic strike echoed across the empty street. Instantly, Ethan stopped moving. His eyes lost focus. His shoulders stiffened. The hammer slipped from his hand, metal hitting concrete. Another sound, another memory. A convoy, a roadside blast, dust filling the air. Someone screaming his name. Ethan! The voice sounded so real that he turned toward the street. No one stood there. Only empty buildings. Only wind. Titan reached him before he fell. The German shepherd nudged Ethan's elbow firmly, then placed one heavy paw across his boot, grounding him, breathing with him, minute by minute. Reality returned once again. Ethan sat heavily on the porch steps. I hate this. His voice cracked. I hate that it still owns me. Titan rested his head across Ethan's knee. The old soldier looked into the dog's amber eyes. You never gave up on me. The dog blinked once, as though the answer had always been obvious. Late that afternoon, Ethan noticed tire tracks leading away from town toward the highway. Fresh tracks. Not his. Someone had been there recently. He studied them for several seconds, then glanced toward the surrounding forest. Nothing moved. Still. The feeling of being watched lingered. By sunset, their supplies had become painfully small. 1 can of soup, half a loaf of bread, a bottle of water. Tomorrow they would have to find food somewhere beyond Blackbriar. The nearest town lay nearly 20 miles away. As darkness settled once again, Ethan started a tiny fire inside the old fireplace using fallen branches gathered from outside. The flames barely warmed the room. A soft knock interrupted the silence. 3 gentle taps. Ethan stood instantly. Titan was already facing the door, not growling, waiting. Ethan opened it cautiously. Standing on the porch was an elderly woman wearing a thick wool coat and carrying 2 covered casserole dishes. Steam drifted from beneath the lids. I figured someone finally bought this place. Her voice carried the calm warmth of someone who had lived through enough winters to recognize hardship without asking questions. My name's Grace Holloway. She smiled kindly. I run the diner over on Highway 12. Ethan hesitated. I don't have money. I didn't ask for any. She held out one of the dishes. You looked hungry. For a long moment, Ethan simply stared. It had been a very long time since anyone had offered him kindness without expecting something in return. Grace noticed the military vest folded neatly beside Titan. Then she looked at Ethan. You served. He nodded once. So did my husband. Silence settled between them. Not awkward. Respectful. She placed both dishes on the porch. Beef stew. She smiled toward Titan. And I brought something for your partner, too. From her coat pocket, she pulled a package of smoked beef wrapped in butcher paper. Titan accepted it gently from her hand. Well, Grace said with a soft laugh, he's got better manners than most folks I know. For the first time in months. Ethan laughed. Only a little. but it was real. As Grace climbed back into her pickup, she looked toward the far end of Main Street, the old land office. Her smile slowly disappeared. Funny thing. Ethan followed her gaze. What about it? Grace looked back at Titan, who was already staring toward the same building again. I've lived near Blackbriar almost 50 years. She paused. And I've never seen a dog look at that place the way yours does. She climbed into her truck without another word. Moments later, her taillights disappeared down the mountain road. The wind swept across the empty town once more. Titan remained standing in the middle of the street, watching the abandoned land office. Watching, as though he could hear something buried beneath decades of silence. The first rays of morning sunlight spilled over the Rocky Mountains, turning the abandoned streets of Blackbriar into ribbons of gold and shadow. Frost covered every rooftop. The old mining town looked frozen in time. Ethan Walker stood outside the general store with a steaming tin cup of coffee Grace Holloway had insisted he take before leaving the diner the evening before. Titan wasn't beside him. That immediately caught Ethan's attention. Titan? The German Shepherd was nowhere near the porch. Ethan set the cup down and walked into the empty street. Titan. A familiar scratching sound echoed through the still air. Not frantic, steady, purposeful. Ethan followed the sound toward the abandoned land office. The brick building stood at the far end of Main Street, its faded white letters barely visible beneath decades of weather. A cracked flagpole leaned beside the entrance. The American flag had long since disappeared. Titan stood on the porch, his nose pressed against the warped wooden floor. Scratch, pause, scratch, pause, scratch. What have you found? Titan glanced back only once before returning to the exact same spot. Ethan stepped onto the porch. The old boards groaned beneath his boots. He knelt beside the dog and ran his hand across the weathered wood. Nothing looked unusual. No fresh nails. No visible seams. Only dust. Years of dust. Titan scratched again. Harder this time. The sound echoed hollow beneath the floor. Ethan froze. Hollow. He tapped the boards with the handle of his crowbar. Solid. 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 Then, thunk. Different. Very different. Titan's ears immediately lifted. Well, Ethan smiled faintly. I guess you've earned the right to be curious. He slid the flat end of the crowbar between two warped planks. The old nails resisted. Wood splintered. Another pull. The first board lifted free with a loud crack. Dust exploded into the morning light. Titan backed away just enough to let Ethan work. One board became two. Two became four. Finally, a square opening appeared beneath the porch floor. Darkness. Cold air drifted upward. Ethan shined his flashlight inside. There, resting neatly between the support beams, sat an old military ammunition box wrapped in cracked oilcloth. For several seconds, neither man nor dog moved. The box looked untouched, as though someone had placed it there and expected it to stay hidden forever. Ethan carefully climbed into the shallow crawl space. He brushed decades of dirt away with his sleeve. The metal box carried faded military markings. U.S. Property 19531 corner had rusted through. Otherwise, it remained surprisingly well preserved. Titan watched every movement without blinking. You've got one incredible nose. Ethan carefully lifted the heavy box onto the porch. The hinges protested loudly. Locked. The old padlock had almost completely rusted away. One sharp strike from the crowbar snapped it open. The lid creaked slowly upward. Inside, no gold, no weapons, no money. Instead, everything had been wrapped with extraordinary care. A thick leather folder. Several yellowed envelopes tied together with faded twine. A folded American flag no larger than 2 hands. Black and white photographs. Military correspondence bearing government seals. Everything remained perfectly dry despite the passing decades. Ethan removed the leather folder first. Embossed across the front were words almost worn away by time. Property records. Blackbriar. He opened it carefully. Inside rested a property deed, unlike any he had ever seen. The paper felt unusually heavy. Its ink had faded, but remained readable. His eyes stopped on one line. Original ownership transfer. Blackbriar Community Trust, 1952. He frowned. I thought the county owned this place. Titan quietly whined, as though urging him to keep reading. The deed listed dozens of names, families, addresses, military service records. Many carried identical handwritten notes beside them. Pending, deferred, awaiting confirmation. Ethan turned another page. Several official signatures appeared near the bottom. One large space remained blank. No explanation. Only empty paper where another signature should have been. What happened here? The answer wasn't in the folder. Not yet. He reached for one of the envelopes. Inside rested several faded photographs. Children standing outside the Blackbriar schoolhouse. Miners gathered beside the old general store. A 4th of July parade rolling down the very street where Ethan now stood. The town had once been alive. Laughing, growing, hopeful. Then came the final photograph. 6 young soldiers wearing Korean War uniforms, standing proudly beside the Blackbriar town sign. One of them held the folded American flag now resting inside the box. Written across the back in careful handwriting were the words, "We'll all come home, no matter how long it takes." Ethan swallowed hard. Something about the picture felt strangely familiar. Not because he recognized any faces, because he recognized the promise. Soldiers made promises like that every day. Not all of them kept them by choice. Titan lowered himself beside the photographs. He gently sniffed the picture before looking toward the center of town. His ears twitched. Someone was coming. A pickup truck rolled slowly onto Main Street. Not the mysterious vehicle Ethan had sensed before. This one belonged to Grace Holloway. She stepped out carrying another paper sack. "Morning." Her smile faded when she noticed the scattered documents. "Oh." She walked closer. "What did you boys find?" Ethan handed her one photograph. Grace studied it quietly. Her expression changed. Not surprise. Recognition. "I know this place." Ethan looked around. "You mean Blackbriar?" She slowly shook her head. "No." She pointed toward the soldiers. "I know one of them." Ethan leaned forward. "You do?" Grace touched the corner of the photograph with trembling fingers. "My father talked about him." "Who?" She hesitated. "I don't remember his name." She looked again. "But I remember the story." "What story?" Grace stared toward the abandoned church across the street. "When I was little, my father said Blackbriar wasn't abandoned because the mine closed." She looked back at Ethan. "He said people left because something happened after those boys went to war." "What happened?" Grace's voice dropped almost to a whisper. "Nobody ever told me. They just said." She looked once more at the leather folder. There were families who waited for sons that never came home. A cold breeze swept through town. The loose papers fluttered across the porch. Titan suddenly stood. Every muscle tightened. His gaze locked onto the hillside overlooking Blackbriar. Far beyond the buildings, almost hidden between the pine trees. Sunlight reflected briefly across a windshield. Someone was watching again. The reflection disappeared almost instantly. Ethan turned too late. What is it? Titan remained perfectly still, eyes fixed on the distant ridge. The feeling returned, that quiet certainty. They were no longer alone in Blackbriar. Someone else now knew. The hidden box had finally been opened. The reflection on the distant ridge vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Only the pine trees remained, swaying gently beneath the cold Montana wind. Ethan narrowed his eyes. Did you see that? Grace followed his gaze but shook her head. See what? There was a truck. She looked back toward the mountains. If someone was up there, they're gone now. Titan continued staring for several long seconds. His body remained calm. But Ethan knew that posture. Years of working beside the military dog had taught him one simple lesson. Titan never stared without a reason. Eventually, the German shepherd relaxed and returned to Ethan's side. Grace looked down at the old photographs again. You shouldn't keep these out here. She carefully gathered the scattered papers. If these are important, somebody may come looking for them. Ethan nodded. I think somebody already has. He placed everything back inside the leather folder before carefully returning it to the ammunition box. Only one document remained in his hands, the original property deed. He studied it once more. Its official county seal had faded but remained unmistakable. This doesn't make sense. Grace looked at him. What doesn't? If the county owned Blackbriar, he tapped the paper gently. Why does this deed say the land belonged to a community trust? Grace folded her arms. I know somebody who might answer that. Who? Walter Briggs, the historian? You've heard of him? I saw his name on a historical marker outside Helena years ago. Grace smiled. Walter remembers things the rest of Montana forgot. Where can I find him? She pointed east. Old Courthouse Museum in Redstone. It's about 30 minutes from here. He only opens 3 days a week. Grace checked her watch, and today happens to be one of them. Ethan didn't hesitate. I'll go now. An hour later, the pickup rolled along a narrow highway following the edge of the Bitterroot River. Golden cottonwoods lined the banks. Snow-covered peaks rose beyond them. Titan sat quietly beside Ethan, his nose occasionally lifting toward the open window. The old Courthouse Museum appeared at the center of Redstone. It had once served as the county courthouse before becoming a small historical archive decades earlier. Inside, dust floated through shafts of sunlight spilling across shelves filled with mining tools, faded newspapers, and black and white photographs. An elderly man stood atop a ladder carefully arranging old books. He wore thick glasses and suspenders. Without turning around, he said, "You're either here to donate history or make trouble." Ethan smiled faintly. I hope neither. The man climbed down. You must be Walter Briggs. I am. Walter extended a weathered hand. Ethan Walker. The old historian studied him carefully. Military. Ethan nodded. Former Navy SEAL. Walter smiled knowingly. I've met enough veterans to recognize the eyes. He noticed Titan waiting quietly near the entrance. And that's one fine service dog. Titan. Walter crouched slowly. Titan walked forward, sniffed his hand once, then allowed the elderly man to scratch gently behind his ears. Disciplined. Walter smiled. He reminds me of the military police dogs I met as a boy. Ethan carefully placed the leather folder onto the large oak table. I found these. Walter adjusted his glasses. The moment he saw the property deed, his smile disappeared. He stopped breathing for a moment. Where? His voice almost failed him. "Did you get this, Blackbriar?" Walter slowly lowered himself into a chair. "I never thought." He carefully lifted the fragile document with both hands. "I spent 40 years looking for this." Ethan exchanged a surprised glance with Titan. "You knew it existed?" Walter nodded. "I knew it had existed. I assumed it had been destroyed." He spread the pages across the table. His eyes moved rapidly from signature to signature. Then he froze. "My God." "What?" Walter pointed toward the heading. "Blackbriar Community Trust. I've never heard of it. Almost nobody has." Walter leaned back heavily. After the Korean War, the federal government quietly approved land grants for families of soldiers listed as missing in action. Ethan listened without interrupting. Blackbriar was chosen. The mining company donated nearly the entire town so the families could build new lives together. Ethan frowned. Then why was it abandoned? Walter sighed. Because the transfer never happened. He opened another drawer and removed a thick county record book. Yellowed pages crackled as he searched. There. He pointed toward an official county entry. County Acquisition. Blackbriar, 1954. Walter looked back at the original deed. That's impossible. What is? The county legally claimed ownership 2 years after this trust was created, which means... Walter's eyes narrowed. Someone erased the trust. Silence settled over the room. Even the ticking wall clock seemed louder. Ethan finally spoke. Who could do that? Walter slowly removed his glasses. Someone with power. Someone who stood to gain. He turned another page inside the leather folder. A folded letter slipped free. Neither man had noticed it before. Walter carefully unfolded the brittle paper. The letter carried official military stationery. Most of the ink had faded, but several lines remained readable. To the families of Blackbriar, pending confirmation of those still missing, the community trust shall remain protected until every legal beneficiary has been accounted for. Walter's eyes widened. This changes everything. How? If this letter is authentic, Blackbriar should never have been sold. Ethan stared silently at the deed resting on the table. You mean, I don't actually own it? Walter thought carefully before answering. You own the interest that was sold, but the county may never have possessed legal authority to sell it. The room fell quiet again. Outside, church bells echoed faintly across Redstone. Walter carefully folded the letter. Ethan, this isn't just an old property dispute. This could affect dozens of military families. Before Ethan could answer, glass shattered somewhere inside the museum. Both men turned instantly. Titan was already moving. A rear window had exploded inward. Broken glass covered the wooden floor. Cold air rushed into the archive. Someone had been there, only seconds earlier. Walter hurried toward the back room. No. He stopped abruptly. Several drawers had been pulled open. Historical files littered the floor. Cabinets stood half-emptied. Nothing else appeared damaged. Nothing valuable had been stolen. Only one section had been searched. County land records. Walter's face turned pale. They weren't after money. Ethan slowly scanned the room. They were looking for documents. Titan sniffed along the broken window, then crossed the room. He stopped beside a muddy footprint leading back outside. His ears rose sharply. The scent was fresh, very fresh. Ethan stepped outside just in time to hear an engine roaring somewhere beyond the museum. He caught only a glimpse. A black pickup disappearing around the corner. No license plate. No identifying marks. only dust. When he returned inside, Walter remained staring at the scattered files. His voice had become little more than a whisper. They know. They know the deed has surfaced. He looked directly at Ethan. And if they're willing to break into my museum in broad daylight, he paused, they'll do far worse to keep the truth buried. Titan quietly walked back to Ethan's side. His gaze remained fixed on the shattered window. Outside, dark clouds began gathering above the mountains. The first snowflakes of an early storm drifted silently toward Blackbriar. Somewhere beyond those forests, someone had already decided that Ethan Walker could no longer be ignored. Snow began falling before Ethan and Titan reached the highway. Large flakes drifted across the windshield, soft at first, then thick enough to blur the road winding back toward Blackbriar. The mountains disappeared behind a white curtain, leaving only dark pine trees standing like silent sentries along the roadside. Neither Ethan nor Titan made a sound. Walter's words echoed through Ethan's mind. Blackbriar should never have been sold. If that was true, someone had spent decades protecting a lie, and now that lie was beginning to crack. Titan suddenly lifted his head. His ears pointed toward the passenger side window. Ethan noticed immediately. What is it? The German shepherd's nose twitched once. Then again. He wasn't alarmed. He was tracking. Ethan glanced into the side mirror. Far behind them, barely visible through the snowfall, a black pickup appeared around the last bend. No headlights, just a dark silhouette following at a steady distance. The same kind of truck Walter had seen leaving the museum. Ethan slowed slightly. The truck slowed. He accelerated. So did the truck. A familiar feeling settled into his chest. Not panic. Training. Years of military experience taught him to recognize patterns before danger revealed itself. We've got company. Titan remained perfectly still, watching through the rear window. 20 minutes later, Ethan turned onto the old county road leading into Blackbriar. The black pickup continued past the intersection without following. Within seconds, it disappeared into the snowfall. Ethan didn't relax. Not yet. Whoever had been watching didn't need to chase him. They already knew exactly where he lived. By the time Ethan parked outside the abandoned general store, evening had settled over the valley. Fresh snow covered the empty streets. The footprints he and Titan had left that morning had vanished completely. Blackbriar looked untouched. Almost peaceful. Grace Holloway's casserole dish still rested beside the front door, washed clean and ready to return. Inside, Ethan carefully placed the leather folder, photographs, and original deed into an old steel toolbox beneath loose floorboards inside the general store. Only Titan watched where he hid them. If somebody comes looking, Ethan quietly closed the lid. They won't find them easily. Titan looked toward the front window. The dog gave one low, uncertain whine. Ethan walked over. Nothing. Only snow drifting through the empty street. Still, that feeling remained. Someone was close. The following morning brought bright sunshine reflecting off untouched snow. Ethan spent hours repairing another section of the general store roof. Working helped. Keeping his hands busy pushed the nightmares farther away. Titan patrolled the nearby buildings, occasionally disappearing between abandoned storefronts before returning to check on Ethan. Just after noon, the sound of tires echoed through town. A brand new black SUV rolled slowly onto Main Street. Unlike Grace's weathered pickup, this vehicle looked expensive, clean, out of place. It stopped directly in front of the general store. A tall man stepped out, wearing polished boots and a dark wool coat that probably cost more than Ethan's truck. His silver hair was perfectly combed. His smile never reached his eyes. Mr. Walker. Ethan climbed down from the roof. Can I help you? The man removed a leather glove before extending his hand. Douglas Kane. Ethan didn't shake it. Kane slowly lowered his hand without appearing offended. I own several thousand acres surrounding this valley. I've heard the county finally sold Blackbriar, so I thought I'd introduce myself. Titan quietly walked to Ethan's side. The German shepherd stood between the two men without making a sound. Kane noticed. Beautiful dog. He served with you? Yes. I appreciate military men. Kane smiled pleasantly. My father was in Korea. Something about the sentence felt rehearsed. Too smooth. Too convenient. What do you want? Kane looked around the abandoned town. This place has potential. A great deal of potential. He removed a folded map from his coat. I'm developing a luxury mountain resort. Hunting cabins, fishing lodges, private hiking trails. He spread the map across the hood of his SUV. Blackbriar sat directly in the center. I'd like to buy your property. Ethan glanced at the map. I'm not selling. You haven't heard my offer. I don't need to. Kane chuckled politely. Everyone has a price. Not everyone. For the first time, Kane's smile faded slightly. I'll give you $50,000. Ethan almost laughed. I paid $800. You'd make quite a profit. I'm staying. Kane folded the map slowly. You know, his tone remained calm. People don't usually move to ghost towns. They move away from them. I guess I'm different. I suppose you are. Kane looked toward Titan. The dog hadn't taken his eyes off him. Think carefully, Mr. Walker. This valley is going to change. It would be unfortunate if you found yourself standing in the way. He climbed back into the SUV. Before closing the door, he spoke one final sentence. If you discover anything unusual around here, I'd appreciate knowing. The engine started. Minutes later, the SUV disappeared beyond the trees. Ethan watched until it was gone. He knows. Titan quietly huffed in agreement. That night, the temperature dropped below freezing. The wind howled through broken windows. Ethan woke shortly after midnight. Not because of a nightmare, because Titan was standing. Every muscle in the German shepherd's body had become rigid. His eyes fixed on the front door. Someone was outside. Ethan reached quietly for the heavy flashlight beside his sleeping bag. No footsteps, no voices, only wind. Then, a shadow crossed the broken front window. Another followed. 3 figures, moving carefully. Faces hidden beneath dark winter hoods. Titan gave a deep warning growl, the kind Ethan had heard only during dangerous missions. The front door burst inward. Wood splintered across the floor. One masked man rushed inside carrying a heavy wooden club. Another headed toward the back rooms. The third searched near the counter. Find the papers! The words were sharp, urgent. Ethan ducked behind a support beam as the first attacker swung. The club smashed into old shelving instead. Wood exploded into the air. Titan launched forward like a bolt of lightning. His powerful body slammed into the attacker's chest, knocking the man backward through the broken doorway. Outside, another masked figure grabbed a long hunting knife. Before Ethan could reach them, the man slashed wildly toward Titan. The blade caught the German shepherd across his shoulder. Titan yelped, but he never let go. Instead, he drove the attacker backward into the snow, forcing him to drop the weapon. "Move!" one of the others shouted. "They're not here!" The 3 men scrambled toward a waiting pickup hidden farther down the street. Within seconds, the truck disappeared into the darkness. Silence returned. Ethan rushed to Titan. The German shepherd remained standing, but blood stained the white snow beneath his front leg. No, Ethan dropped to his knees. "Nobody." Titan leaned against him, breathing heavily, but still trying to stay upright. His tail moved once, as if reassuring Ethan instead of asking for help. Ethan pressed both hands gently against the wound to slow the bleeding. His own breathing became uneven. The sight of blood, the freezing air, the chaos. For one terrifying instant, memories from combat crashed back into his mind. Friends calling for medics, helicopters overhead, smoke swallowing the night. He squeezed his eyes shut. "Stay with me." Titan pressed his nose against Ethan's cheek, bringing him back, just as he always had. Ethan opened his eyes again. He forced himself to focus. The war was over. This was Blackbriar. This was Titan. And Titan was still alive. Wrapping his coat tightly around the wounded dog, Ethan carefully lifted him into the pickup. As the old engine struggled to life, Ethan looked once toward the empty street. The attackers hadn't taken the deed. They hadn't found the documents. But they had sent a message. Someone powerful was no longer trying to scare him away. They were willing to hurt the one companion Ethan loved most. And for the first time since arriving in Blackbriar, the fight had become deeply personal. The old pickup roared through the sleeping mountain roads, its headlights cutting narrow tunnels through swirling snow. Ethan gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. One hand kept drifting toward Titan, resting gently against the German shepherd's neck whenever the road straightened. "It's okay." His voice was barely steady. "We're almost there." Titan lay across the passenger seat, breathing slowly. Blood had soaked through the blanket Ethan wrapped around his shoulder, but the dog never whimpered. His amber eyes remained fixed on Ethan, calm, trusting, exactly the way they had been during missions overseas. The veterinary clinic sat at the edge of a small farming community outside Redstone. A single light glowed above the entrance despite the late hour. Ethan carried Titan through the front door. "Please." The bell above the entrance jingled sharply. "I need help." A woman wearing green surgical scrubs hurried from the back hallway. She looked to be in her late 30s, her dark hair tied into a loose ponytail. The moment she saw the injured German shepherd, her expression changed from surprise to complete focus. "Bring him in." Her voice was calm, confident. "I'm Dr. Rachel Monroe." Ethan carefully laid Titan onto the examination table. Rachel immediately began checking the wound. He lost blood, but he's still alert. She looked up. "Tell me exactly what happened." "Someone attacked us." "Knife? Yes." She nodded once. "The cut is deep, but I don't think it reached the shoulder joint." Relief washed over Ethan so suddenly that his knees nearly gave out. Rachel noticed. "When was the last time you slept?" Ethan stared at the floor. "I don't remember." "And eaten?" He hesitated. "Yesterday." Rachel disappeared briefly before returning with clean towels. "I'll take care of him. You need to sit down. I'm staying." "I wasn't asking you to leave." She smiled gently. "I'm asking you not to collapse." For the next hour, Ethan sat only a few feet away while Rachel cleaned the wound, stopped the bleeding, and carefully stitched the torn muscle. Titan never took his eyes off Ethan. Even under medication, he watched him, guarding him, watching over him, just as he always had. When Rachel finally removed her gloves, she let out a quiet breath. "He's a tough old soldier." Ethan walked to the table. "Will he recover?" "He'll have a scar." She gently stroked Titan's head, "and he'll need several weeks before running the way he used to." She looked at Ethan. "But he should recover." Ethan closed his eyes. "Thank God." Rachel studied him for a moment. "Military?" "Navy SEAL, I thought so." My brother served in Afghanistan. There was a brief silence between them. The hardest wounds aren't always visible. Ethan looked away. No, they aren't. Morning arrived beneath pale gray skies. Snow covered the fields surrounding the clinic. Rachel insisted Titan remain overnight for observation. Ethan refused to leave. He sat beside the kennel, watching the slow rise and fall of Titan's breathing. Somewhere near dawn, he drifted asleep. Only for a moment. But it was enough. The dream came immediately. Smoke, sand, a ruined village, someone shouting his name over gunfire. "Ethan, move!" He turned. One of his teammates lay injured behind a collapsed wall. Ethan tried to reach him. His legs wouldn't move. Everything slowed. Another explosion. Dust swallowed the sky. He heard Titan barking somewhere far away. Then, nothing. Ethan woke with a violent gasp. His chair crashed backward onto the floor. His heart pounded so hard he thought it might burst. For one terrifying second, he couldn't remember where he was. Rachel hurried into the room. "Ethan." She stopped several feet away, not touching him, not crowding him, just speaking calmly. "You're safe." He stared at the walls, the kennel, the blankets. Titan. Reality slowly returned. Titan lifted his head despite the bandages and quietly nudged Ethan's trembling hand through the kennel door. The simple touch broke something inside him. Ethan sank onto the floor. "I couldn't save them." Rachel didn't interrupt. "I keep seeing their faces. I hear them every night." His voice cracked. "I left the military 5 years ago, but part of me," he looked toward Titan, "never came home." Rachel sat beside him. "My brother used to say something similar. He survived, but he believed survival meant he had failed the people who didn't." Ethan stared silently ahead. "I've spent years trying to outrun memories." Rachel nodded. "They're faster than people." She smiled gently. "But healing isn't about outrunning them. It's about refusing to let them drive." Neither of them spoke again for several minutes. The clinic remained quiet except for the soft hum of the heating system. Outside, sunlight slowly broke through the clouds. Late that afternoon, Grace Holloway arrived carrying 2 paper bags. "I figured neither of you had eaten." Rachel laughed. "You figured correctly." Grace handed Ethan a warm bowl of homemade chicken soup. "You look worse than the dog." "I probably do. You definitely do." She pulled up a chair. "I heard what happened. The whole valley's talking." Ethan looked surprised. "So quickly?" Grace smiled. "Nothing travels faster than bad news in a small town." Her expression grew serious. "People also know someone attacked a veteran and his service dog." She lowered her voice. "That doesn't sit well around here. For the first time in years, folks are asking questions about Blackbriar." Ethan looked up. "What kind of questions?" "The kind powerful people don't like." Grace glanced toward the window. "You've stirred up old ghosts. They've been sleeping a long time." Rachel folded her arms. "And somebody wants them to stay asleep." 3 days passed. Titan grew stronger each morning. He could stand now, walk carefully, even wag his tail whenever Ethan entered the room. The stitches still pulled with every step, but the determination in his eyes never faded. On the 4th morning, Rachel removed the final bandage. She knelt beside Titan. "Easy, hero." The German shepherd stretched cautiously, then walked across the room. A slight limp remained. Nothing more. Rachel smiled. I think someone wants to go home. Titan immediately looked toward Ethan, then toward the clinic door, as though there had never been another destination. Rachel handed Ethan a small bottle of medication. Twice a day. No hard running, no climbing, and absolutely no heroics. Ethan smiled for the first time in days. I'll do my best. She laughed softly. I wasn't talking to you. She scratched Titan gently behind the ears. I was talking to him. Titan seemed almost offended by the suggestion. Grace hugged Ethan before they left. You're not alone anymore. He looked at her. You barely know me. She shook her head. I know enough. I know a good man when I see one. And I know that Old Town chose the right person. The drive back to Blackbriar felt different. The mountains no longer seemed empty. Neighbors waved as Ethan passed through nearby communities. A rancher tipped his hat. A gas station owner refused to let him pay for coffee. Word had spread. People who had never met Ethan knew about the veteran who stayed beside his wounded dog. They knew about Titan. More importantly, someone else knew. High above the valley, parked once again among the pines overlooking Blackbriar, a pair of binoculars followed the blue pickup returning to town. A voice inside the parked SUV spoke quietly into a cell phone. He's back. A long pause. No. The voice continued. The dog survived. Silence followed. Then one final sentence. So we'll have to find another way. The call ended. Far below, Ethan parked outside the general store. Titan stepped carefully onto the snow-covered street. His shoulder still ached. His gait remained slower than before. Yet after only a few moments, he stopped. His ears lifted. His nose pointed toward the abandoned courthouse standing beyond the center of town. Not the land office this time. The courthouse. He stared so intensely that Ethan felt a chill despite the afternoon sun. What is it now, buddy? Titan took one careful step toward the old courthouse, then another, as though something hidden beneath decades of silence had just begun calling his name. Titan stood motionless in the middle of Main Street. The winter wind lifted loose snow into tiny spirals around his paws, but the retired military dog barely blinked. His eyes remained fixed on the abandoned courthouse that stood near the center of Blackbriar, its cracked stone steps disappearing beneath years of neglect. Ethan followed his gaze. The courthouse was larger than the rest of the town's buildings. Its clock tower had stopped decades earlier. Broken windows reflected the pale afternoon sun. A faded bronze plaque beside the entrance still read, Blackbriar County Courthouse, dedicated 1911. We'll take a look, Ethan said quietly. But we're taking it slow. He glanced at Titan's healing shoulder. No heroics. Titan looked back at him with the familiar expression that always seemed to say the same thing. I'll decide that. Ethan couldn't help smiling. You've always been stubborn. The courthouse doors refused to open until Ethan leaned his full weight against them. The heavy oak panels groaned inward, sending years of dust drifting through the beams of sunlight that poured into the entrance hall. The smell inside was different from the other buildings. Old paper, weathered oak, stone, the scent of forgotten history. Titan stepped carefully across the cracked tile floor. His injured shoulder still made him limp slightly, but every movement remained deliberate. Court benches sat exactly where they had been left decades earlier. The judge's bench still overlooked the empty courtroom. Stacks of mold-covered files lay scattered across the clerk's office. It felt less abandoned than paused, as if everyone had simply stood up one afternoon and never returned. Ethan slowly walked toward the courtroom. This place has stories. Titan suddenly turned left, not toward the judge's bench, toward a narrow hallway leading behind the courtroom. He sniffed once, then continued. The hallway opened into several small offices. Most had collapsed ceilings. One room still contained an old filing cabinet that had rusted completely shut. Another held shelves filled with crumbling legal books. Nothing seemed unusual. Then Titan stopped. He lowered his nose beneath the rear of the judge's bench. Scratch, scratch, scratch. The exact same sound Ethan had heard beneath the floor of the land office. There it is again. Titan scratched harder. The hollow echo rolled through the empty courtroom. Ethan knelt beside him. The back panel of the massive oak bench looked solid. At first, running his fingers across the wood, he noticed a narrow seam almost invisible beneath years of dust. A hidden compartment. He retrieved the crowbar from his toolbox. The old nails resisted. One finally snapped, then another. The heavy wooden panel swung outward with a long, dry creak. Behind it rested a narrow compartment only 2 feet deep. Inside sat 3 leather-bound journals tied together with faded blue ribbon. Beside them rested a tarnished brass key and a small cloth pouch. Ethan carefully lifted the journals into the light. The leather had cracked with age, but the pages inside remained surprisingly well preserved. The first page carried neat handwriting. County Clerk, Henry Collins. Private record, January 12th, 1953. Ethan exchanged a glance with Titan. I think we've found someone's secret. He carefully turned another page. The handwriting remained steady. Official records tell one story. These pages tell another. If you are reading this, then I pray the truth has finally found an honest person. Ethan felt the hair rise along his neck. He continued reading. Henry Collins described meetings held after the Korean War. Businessmen, county officials, bank representatives. Every meeting centered on one subject. Blackbriar. The entries became darker with every page. The families were promised the town. Some officials argued we should honor the agreement. Others said the valley would someday become too valuable. Ethan frowned. Valuable? In the 1950s, Blackbriar had already been declining. Why would anyone fight over it? He turned another page. A folded map slipped free. Unlike modern maps, this one marked underground mineral surveys beneath the valley. Several handwritten notes circled large sections of land. Future development potential. Mountain reservoir. Tourism corridor. Ethan stared silently. Someone had known decades ago that Blackbriar would someday become valuable again. Titan quietly nudged the second journal. Ethan opened it. The tone had changed completely. The entries were shorter, more hurried. Today they paid Judge Ellsworth. County Commissioner Hayes signed the forged transfer. I watched them remove the original deed. I said nothing. The next page carried several names, each accompanied by dollar amounts, payments, bribes, dates. Every signature matched names Walter Briggs had already mentioned while discussing the missing property records. This wasn't an accident, Ethan whispered. It was organized. Titan looked toward the courtroom entrance. His ears lifted. Ethan immediately closed the journals. The building had become silent again. Too silent. Then came a faint sound. Crunch. Snow. Someone walking outside. Ethan quietly moved toward the nearest broken window. Across the street, a dark pickup rolled slowly past the courthouse without stopping. Its windows were heavily tinted. The truck disappeared behind the old church. By the time Ethan reached the front entrance, it was gone. No license plate. No faces. Just another reminder. Someone was still watching. He returned to the journals. The final volume felt heavier than the others. Inside rested dozens of folded receipts, handwritten agreements, and copied county documents. Henry Collins had hidden everything. Every payment. Every forged signature. Every fraudulent land transfer. Near the back of the journal, Ethan found one final entry. The handwriting shook noticeably. If these pages are ever found, protect the families before you protect my name. Powerful men stole this town from people already grieving sons who never came home. I lacked the courage to stop them. Perhaps someone else someday will. No further entries followed. The final pages were blank. Ethan slowly closed the journal. He looked around the empty courtroom. Henry Collins had carried the weight of that secret for the rest of his life. Too afraid to expose it. Too ashamed to destroy it. Instead, he had hidden the truth where he hoped an honest person might someday find it. Titan leaned gently against Ethan's leg. You did this. Ethan smiled softly. I would have walked right past it. The German shepherd wagged his tail once. Outside, gray clouds gathered once more over the mountains. The afternoon light faded quickly. Ethan carefully wrapped the journals inside an old canvas tarp before placing them into his backpack. The brass key and cloth pouch went into a separate pocket. He hadn't even opened the pouch yet. That could wait. Getting the journals somewhere safe mattered more. As they stepped outside, the first flakes of fresh snow drifted down from the darkening sky. The courthouse stood silent behind them. Its secret had survived more than 70 years. Now it belonged to Ethan, and that meant it would not remain hidden much longer. Far beyond the edge of town, a black SUV sat on a ridge overlooking Blackbriar. Douglas Kane lowered his binoculars. His jaw tightened. So, he murmured quietly. They found the courthouse. He reached for his phone. This time, there was no polite smile, no generous offer, no negotiation, only a single cold instruction. Burn it! The call ended. Snow continued falling across the valley, gently covering the old courthouse roof. Neither Ethan nor Titan saw the smoke-colored SUV disappear into the trees. Neither realized that before another sunrise, someone intended to erase the courthouse and every secret it still contained, forever. The storm settled over Blackbriar shortly after midnight. Snow fell in slow, silent sheets, covering rooftops, fences, and abandoned wagons until the forgotten mining town looked almost peaceful again. Inside the old general store, Ethan placed Henry Collins's journals inside the same steel toolbox where he had hidden the original deed. He wrapped everything in canvas before sliding the box beneath the loose floorboards. If they come back, he whispered to Titan, they won't find these. Titan lay beside the fireplace, his bandaged shoulder resting on a folded blanket. The wound still pained him. Every time he shifted, Ethan noticed. You should be resting. Titan lifted his head. His ears turned toward the front door, then toward the courthouse. He stood, slowly, carefully. The old German shepherd walked to the doorway and stared into the darkness beyond the broken windows. What is it? Titan gave one sharp bark. Not a warning, a summons. Seconds later, another scent reached Ethan. Smoke. Not from his fireplace, from outside. He threw open the front door. A faint orange glow flickered beyond the courthouse roof. His stomach tightened. No. The glow suddenly erupted into flames. Fire burst through one of the courthouse windows, spreading with terrifying speed across the dry wooden beams inside. Within moments, smoke rolled into the snowy night. Someone had set the building on fire. Ethan grabbed his coat. Titan, stay! The German shepherd ignored him. Together they sprinted across Main Street. The courthouse doors were already surrounded by thick, black smoke. Flames crawled across the ceiling inside like living creatures. Old timber cracked loudly as years of dry wood surrendered to the heat. Ethan covered his mouth with his sleeve and rushed inside. Titan! The German shepherd stayed close behind, despite his healing shoulder. The courtroom glowed orange beneath falling embers. Burning fragments drifted through the air like fiery snow. The judge's bench had already caught fire. The hidden compartment behind it was disappearing beneath smoke. Ethan raced forward. He reached into the opening where the journals had been hidden. Empty. His heart lurched. Then he remembered. He had already moved them. Relief flashed across his face, but it lasted only an instant. A sharp crash echoed overhead. A burning beam slammed across the center aisle, separating Ethan from the entrance. Titan! The dog had crossed ahead of him moments earlier. Now thick smoke swallowed the courtroom. Titan! No answer. Only crackling flames. Panic surged through Ethan's chest. The smoke, the heat, the collapsing ceiling. For one terrible instant, the courthouse disappeared. In its place came another burning building, another battlefield, another memory he had spent years trying to bury. Voices shouted. Someone screamed for help. His breathing became shallow. His vision narrowed. He couldn't move. Then, a bark. Strong, determined, real. Not memory. Titan. The sound cut through the panic like sunlight through storm clouds. Ethan forced one deep breath, then another. The courthouse returned. The burning ceiling. The smoke. The fire. He pushed forward. Titan! Another bark echoed from behind the judge's bench. Ethan climbed over fallen timber, ignoring the heat burning through his gloves. There. Titan had become trapped beneath a heavy section of collapsed railing. The old German shepherd struggled but couldn't free himself. His injured shoulder made every movement harder. I'm here. Ethan dropped beside him. Easy, buddy. The beam was too heavy to lift with one hand. He planted both boots against the floor and pushed with everything he had. The wood shifted only slightly. Above them came another loud crack. The ceiling was beginning to fail. Come on. The beam moved another inch. Titan crawled forward, but his back leg caught briefly beneath broken boards. Ethan shoved again. With one final effort, the beam rolled aside. Go! Titan limped toward the exit. Ethan followed. Behind them, fire raced across the courtroom ceiling. Halfway to the doorway, another explosion of sparks showered the entrance. A burning support column crashed to the floor. The only exit vanished beneath flames. Ethan stopped. Smoke filled his lungs. Titan looked at the blocked doorway, then toward a shattered side window. Without hesitation, the German shepherd changed direction. He barked once, leading, showing the way. Ethan followed. Together they climbed over broken furniture toward the window. Titan squeezed through first, despite his injured shoulder. Ethan pulled himself after him. The instant both reached the snowy ground outside. The courthouse roof collapsed inward with a deafening roar. A cloud of sparks exploded into the night sky. The old clock tower shuddered, then slowly folded into the burning building beneath it. For several seconds, neither Ethan nor Titan moved. They simply watched. Years of history disappeared before their eyes. Snow hissed against the flames. Steam rose into the freezing mountain air. Within minutes, headlights appeared from the highway. Grace Holloway's pickup arrived first. Behind her came ranchers from nearby properties carrying shovels, buckets, and portable water tanks. Someone had already called for help. Neighbors formed a line despite the freezing temperature. Water splashed against burning walls. Snow was shoveled onto glowing beams. The effort couldn't save the courthouse, but it kept the flames from spreading to the church and neighboring buildings. As dawn approached, volunteer firefighters from Redstone finally arrived. The fire was brought under control shortly after sunrise. Only the stone walls remained standing. Everything else had become blackened ruins. Grace found Ethan sitting on the courthouse steps with Titan beside him. She handed him a blanket without saying a word. After several minutes, she finally asked quietly, "Did they get what they wanted?" Ethan looked toward the smoking ruins. No. He rested one hand on Titan's neck. The journals were already gone. Grace closed her eyes in relief. Thank God. Nearby, several volunteers spoke quietly among themselves. One of them held up a cell phone. "I recorded part of it." Another nodded. "You can see someone driving away before the fire really took off." The short video spread quickly through nearby communities that morning. It showed the burning courthouse, the former Navy SEAL running into the flames, and his wounded German shepherd refusing to leave him behind. People who had never heard of Blackbriar suddenly heard its name. People who had never met Ethan Walker suddenly knew his face. And everywhere the same question began to spread. Why would someone burn down an abandoned courthouse? High above the valley, Douglas Kane watched the smoke rising through binoculars. At first he smiled. Then his phone vibrated. One of his men spoke nervously. "The building's gone." A pause. But people recorded everything. Kane's smile disappeared. "And Walker?" He made it out. Another pause. "The dog, too." Kane lowered the binoculars slowly. The fire was supposed to destroy evidence. Instead, it had created witnesses. Far below, Ethan looked at the smoking ruins one last time before helping Titan into the pickup. The courthouse was gone. But the truth had survived. And for the first time since arriving in Blackbriar, he realized he was no longer fighting alone. The smoke from the courthouse fire lingered over the valley for 2 days. Even after the flames were gone, the scent of burned timber drifted through the mountain air, settling over Blackbriar like a reminder that someone had tried to erase its history. Instead, they had awakened it. News stations from nearby counties replayed the same short cell phone video again and again. A former Navy SEAL running into a burning courthouse. A wounded German shepherd refusing to leave his side. An abandoned mining town suddenly at the center of questions nobody had asked in 70 years. Grace placed an old newspaper on the counter inside the general store. Across the front page, a headline stretched from edge to edge. "Mystery surrounds fire at abandoned courthouse." Ethan barely glanced at it. His attention remained on Titan, who was lying near the fireplace with his injured shoulder resting comfortably on a folded blanket. "You've become famous." Titan responded with little more than a slow wag of his tail. A truck pulled into town just before noon. Not black, not expensive. A dusty silver SUV climbed slowly over the uneven road before stopping outside the general store. A young woman stepped out carrying a leather briefcase and wearing hiking boots instead of polished dress shoes. She looked more prepared for mountain trails than courtrooms. She extended her hand. "Ethan Walker?" He nodded. "I'm Claire Donovan." "The attorney?" She smiled. "I suppose Walter Briggs called before I arrived. He mentioned you." Claire looked toward the burned courthouse, then back at Ethan. "He also told me what you found, and what someone tried to destroy." Ethan studied her carefully. "Why would you help?" She looked down the empty street before answering. "My grandfather served in Korea. He came home. 3 of his closest friends didn't." She paused. "When I read the names Walter sent me from the journals, one of them belonged to my grandfather's unit." Silence settled between them. "This isn't just another land case." Claire's voice remained steady. "It's a promise that was never kept." She opened her briefcase. "I'd like to help keep it." 3 days later, the county agreed to hold a preliminary public hearing in Redstone. Word spread quickly. By the morning of the hearing, the small courthouse overflowed with reporters, ranchers, veterans, local residents. and descendants of families whose names appeared inside Henry Collins's journals. Walter Briggs sat quietly beside Grace. Rachel Monroe arrived directly from the veterinary clinic, still wearing her work jacket. Titan walked beside Ethan, moving more carefully than before but refusing every offer to stay behind. "You sure about this?" Ethan knelt beside him. Titan gently bumped Ethan's shoulder. The answer was obvious. They walked through the courthouse doors together. Across the room stood Douglas Kane. His tailored suit looked flawless. His smile remained confident. Several attorneys surrounded him, quietly organizing stacks of legal documents. When his eyes met Ethan's, Kane nodded politely, as though they were simply neighbors attending the same meeting. Claire leaned closer. "He wants everyone to think he's calm." "Is he?" "No." She smiled faintly. "People who are winning don't usually hire 3 lawyers." The hearing began promptly at 10. Judge Miriam Collins entered the courtroom. Everyone stood. After several formal introductions, Claire rose first. She spoke calmly, carefully describing the original property deed, the journals hidden inside the courthouse, and the evidence suggesting Blackbriar had been transferred unlawfully decades earlier. Walter testified next. His voice remained clear despite his age. He explained the historical records, the missing military trust, the impossible county acquisition. The room remained silent. Then Kane's lead attorney stood. He adjusted his glasses before speaking. "Your Honor, my client sympathizes deeply with military families. However," he turned toward Ethan, "every document presented by Mr. Walker was conveniently discovered after he purchased highly valuable land." He paused. "There are no surviving official records verifying these claims." Claire immediately objected. "The journals were found by Mr. Walker alone." The attorney interrupted smoothly. No independent witness observed their discovery. He picked up a photograph of the burned courthouse, and unfortunately, the building where these alleged records were stored has now been destroyed. The implication hung heavily in the room. Claire stood again. "The journals survived. We have them." The attorney nodded politely. "Documents anyone could have written." Walter's face reddened. I examined the paper. The ink. The binding. They're authentic. "So you believe?" The attorney smiled. "Belief isn't evidence." Whispers spread across the courtroom. Claire looked toward Ethan. For the first time since the hearing began, she looked uncertain. The judge leaned forward. "Do you possess additional official documentation supporting your claim?" Claire hesitated. "No, Your Honor." The room grew painfully quiet. Douglas Kane folded his hands. The confidence had returned to his expression. Ethan looked down. Titan sat quietly beside him. The German shepherd suddenly lifted his head. His ears twitched. A scent. Faint. Old. He stood. Ethan gently reached for his collar. "Titan." The dog didn't move. Instead, he walked slowly toward the front of the courtroom. Everyone turned to watch. One of Kane's attorneys frowned. "Control your dog." Titan ignored him. He stopped beside the old wooden railing separating the gallery from the courtroom floor. Then he lowered his nose. Scratch, scratch, scratch. The sound froze Ethan where he stood. It was the same sound. The land office. The courthouse. Every discovery had begun exactly this way. Titan scratched again. Judge Collins raised an eyebrow. "What is he doing?" Ethan stepped forward. "I don't know, but whenever he does this, he finds something. A few people laughed quietly. Others leaned forward with curiosity. The judge looked from Ethan to Titan. "What exactly do you expect to find beneath my courtroom floor?" Ethan answered honestly. "I have no idea." A maintenance worker approached with a flashlight. "There is an old storage crawlspace beneath this section. No one's opened it in years." Judge Collins considered the request for several long moments. Finally, she nodded. "Very well. Open it." The maintenance worker removed 2 rusted screws from a square wooden hatch hidden beneath the carpet runner. The panel lifted reluctantly. A rush of stale air escaped from below. The flashlight beam disappeared into darkness. "There are boxes down there." Ethan climbed carefully into the shallow space. Dust coated everything. Old election records, broken furniture, retired filing cabinets. Then, one steel document case. Unlike everything else below, it carried an official county seal. Its lock had rusted away decades earlier. Ethan carefully lifted the lid. Inside rested a leather-bound ledger wrapped in waxed cloth, perfectly preserved. He opened the first page. County Land Registry, 1952 to 1955. Walter Briggs gasped from above. "No." Ethan turned several pages. There it was. The original transfer. The Blackbriar Community Trust. Every signature. Every official seal. Every beneficiary. Untouched. Exactly as Henry Collins had described. Claire looked at the judge. "Your Honor, I believe we've just found independent county records." Walter's hands trembled as he examined the ledger. The handwriting matches. The seals match. The registry numbers match. He looked directly toward Douglas Kane. "This is the original." The courtroom fell completely silent. Kane's confident smile disappeared for the first time. He stared at the ledger without speaking. Beside Ethan, Titan quietly sat down, as though discovering 70 years of buried truth beneath another courtroom floor was simply another day's work. Outside, church bells echoed across Redstone. Inside, every person present understood the same thing. The case had just changed forever, and the deepest secret of Blackbriar was no longer buried beneath the floor. It was now part of the official record. No one spoke for several long seconds. The old county ledger rested on the judge's bench, its yellowed pages illuminated by the morning sunlight streaming through the courtroom windows. Dust floated lazily through the air, but inside the room every eye remained fixed on the same document. Judge Miriam Collins carefully turned another page. "The court will recess for 30 minutes while these records are examined." Her gavel struck once. Instead of the usual wave of conversation that followed a hearing, people remained unusually quiet. They knew they had witnessed something extraordinary. Reporters hurried outside, speaking excitedly into cameras. Veterans gathered in small circles, exchanging solemn handshakes. Some descendants of the Blackbriar families quietly wiped tears from their eyes. Walter Briggs never took his eyes off the ledger. He adjusted his glasses and slowly traced one weathered line after another with the tip of his finger. "The handwriting," he whispered. "It matches every surviving county document from that period." Claire Donovan stood beside him. "And the signatures?" Walter nodded. "Original." He turned another page. "Every one of them." Ethan knelt beside Titan, rubbing the old German shepherd gently behind the ears. "You did it again." Titan leaned into Ethan's hand. The courtroom noise faded into the background. For a brief moment, it was only the two of them, just as it had always been. A soldier, and the dog who had never stopped bringing him home. Walter suddenly stopped turning pages. His expression changed. Confusion. Then disbelief. "Ethan." His voice was almost inaudible. "Come here." Ethan walked over, Walter pointed toward a page near the back of the ledger. There. Rows of handwritten names filled the paper. Military families, witnesses, county officials. Each signature represented someone connected to the original transfer of Blackbriar. Walter placed one trembling finger beside a single name. Sergeant Samuel Walker. Ethan frowned. I've never heard of him. Walter looked up slowly. What was your father's name? David Walker. And your grandfather? Ethan hesitated. I never knew him. My father rarely talked about his family. Walter closed the ledger gently. I think, he said quietly, I've just found out why. The room around them seemed to disappear. Walter removed another document from the steel case. Unlike the ledger, it was folded separately and sealed with brittle wax that had cracked decades earlier. Written across the front were the words, Family Correspondence, Blackbriar Community Trust. He unfolded it carefully. Inside rested several letters. The first had never been mailed. It was addressed simply, To my son. Walter handed it to Ethan. I believe this belongs to you. Ethan looked down at the faded handwriting. The ink had softened with age, but every word remained readable. David, if this reaches you someday, I pray you'll understand why I stayed. The families deserve better than what these men intend to do. If I walk away now, they'll steal everything from the people who already sacrificed enough. If I fail, tell your children that home is something worth protecting. The letter ended there. No signature was necessary. Only one name matched. Samuel Walker. Ethan stared silently at the paper. His throat tightened. My grandfather. Walter nodded slowly. He wasn't one of the men stealing Blackbriar. He was one of the few trying to stop them. Claire carefully read over Ethan's shoulder. The final page is missing. Walter looked back into the steel case. No. He gently lifted another folded sheet. It isn't. The second page carried an official military stamp. Beneath it rested one final handwritten paragraph. If the trust is ever restored, then perhaps our family will finally come home with everyone else's. Walter removed his glasses. I've researched Blackbriar for 40 years. I never connected Samuel Walker to your family. There simply weren't enough surviving records. Ethan folded the letter carefully. His hands shook. His entire life he had believed his family history ended in silence. His father had never spoken about his grandfather. There had been no photographs, no stories, no medals displayed above the fireplace. Nothing. Now, inside an abandoned county ledger, he had found the first piece of his own history. Claire watched him quietly. How are you doing? Ethan let out a slow breath. I don't know, He looked toward Titan. I thought buying Blackbriar was desperation. He smiled sadly. Maybe it was something else. Walter rested one hand gently on Ethan's shoulder. Sometimes history has a strange way of calling people home. Outside, the courthouse bells rang noon. The hearing resumed shortly afterward. Judge Collins returned to the bench. She reviewed the newly discovered ledger, Henry Collins's journals, and the original deed one final time before looking toward both legal teams. The evidence presented today establishes substantial reason to believe that the transfer of Blackbriar may have been conducted unlawfully. The room became completely silent. She continued. This matter will proceed to a full investigation. She turned toward the county sheriff seated near the rear of the courtroom. I am ordering the preservation of all remaining records connected to Blackbriar. Then she looked directly at Douglas Kane. Until this investigation concludes, no development activity shall occur on the property. Kane remained expressionless. Only the tightening of his jaw betrayed his frustration. Claire allowed herself the smallest smile. It wasn't complete victory, not yet. But it was enough. Outside the courthouse, reporters crowded around Ethan. "Mr. Walker, what does today's ruling mean to you? Did you expect your dog to discover another historic document? Do you believe someone deliberately tried to destroy evidence?" Ethan paused before answering. He looked down at Titan sitting faithfully beside him, then toward the mountains rising beyond Redstone. "I'm not here because I wanted attention," he spoke calmly. "I'm here because a promise was forgotten." He gently rested his hand on Titan's neck. "My partner kept finding the truth. I simply followed where he led." The reporters fell unusually quiet. One elderly veteran standing near the courthouse steps removed his cap. Then another did the same. Soon, several others followed. Not because Ethan had won, because they understood what the story had become. It was no longer only about land. It was about honor, about promises, about people who refused to let forgotten service members disappear into history. Late that afternoon, Ethan and Titan drove back toward Blackbriar. Snow still covered the mountains, but sunlight now broke through scattered clouds, painting the valley in shades of gold. Ethan unfolded Samuel Walker's letter once more while parked beside an overlook. He read the final sentence again. "Home is something worth protecting." He looked toward the abandoned town waiting below. For the first time since arriving there, it no longer felt like a place he had purchased. It felt like a place that had been waiting for him. Titan quietly rested his head against Ethan's shoulder. The old German shepherd closed his eyes for a moment, as though satisfied that another piece of the journey had finally fallen into place. Neither of them noticed a county sheriff's cruiser quietly turning onto the road below. Inside sat investigators carrying newly signed warrants. Elsewhere, in an office overlooking the valley, Douglas Kane stood alone beside a window. He watched the distant mountains in silence before slowly removing every framed photograph from his desk. He understood something now that he had refused to believe before. The story was no longer under his control, and the truth he had spent years trying to bury had finally learned how to speak. The investigation moved faster than anyone in Blackbriar expected. Within days, county investigators, state records specialists, and financial crime detectives arrived in Redstone carrying boxes of archived files pulled from forgotten storage rooms across Montana. Every new document seemed to confirm what Henry Collins had feared all those years ago. The Blackbriar Community Trust had been deliberately erased. Land transfers had been altered. Official records had been rewritten. Money had changed hands. The evidence formed a trail that stretched back generations. For Ethan Walker, however, the headlines mattered less than the quiet mornings. Each sunrise still found him outside the old general store, with Titan at his side. The German shepherd's shoulder had healed enough for longer walks, though a slight limp remained whenever the mornings were especially cold. Ethan noticed it every time. "You earned that scar." Titan looked up at him, "So did I." The words carried no bitterness anymore. Only acceptance. The nightmares still came. Some nights Ethan woke before dawn, breathing hard as memories of distant battlefields crashed through his mind. But now there was always something waiting beyond the darkness. The smell of pine, fresh mountain air, the sound of Titan's steady breathing, and the knowledge that he wasn't waking alone anymore. One afternoon, several county vehicles rolled into Blackbriar. Grace stepped onto the porch of the general store just as Walter Briggs climbed out of the lead truck, carrying a thick envelope. Behind him came Claire Donovan, smiling despite the exhaustion written across her face. Walter removed his hat. "I thought you'd want to hear this in person." Ethan folded the blueprint he had been studying. "What happened?" Claire handed him a packet of official documents. "The county has completed its preliminary investigation." He opened the first page. At the very top appeared one sentence. Emergency order. All development claims on Blackbriar suspended, pending restoration of the Blackbriar Community Trust. Ethan slowly looked up. Claire nodded. It's official. The land can't be sold. It can't be developed. And no one can remove the remaining historic buildings. Walter smiled. The town finally belongs to the people it was meant to serve. Grace quietly wiped away a tear. I never thought I'd live long enough to hear those words. Another vehicle arrived moments later. This time it belonged to the county sheriff. 2 deputies stepped out. Douglas Kane climbed from the back seat. He wasn't handcuffed. He didn't resist. He simply stood, for a long moment, looking across the town he had tried so hard to control. The sheriff approached Ethan. Mr. Walker. He removed his hat respectfully. Mr. Kane has been formally charged with conspiracy, fraud related to property records, witness intimidation, and arranging the destruction of historical evidence. The valley fell silent. Kane looked toward Ethan. I suppose congratulations are in order. Ethan met his eyes. I never wanted your land. Kane gave a tired laugh. That's the funny part. He looked around the empty streets. I stopped seeing this place as a town years ago. I only saw numbers. He paused. You saw people. The deputies escorted him back toward the vehicle. Just before getting inside, Kane looked once more at Blackbriar. Then he lowered his head. The convoy disappeared down the mountain road. No one celebrated. There was nothing joyful about watching another life unravel. Instead, the silence felt like the closing of an old chapter. Walter finally broke it. So, he smiled. What comes next? Ethan looked around the abandoned town. The collapsed roofs, broken fences, empty homes. Then he unfolded another piece of paper from the envelope Claire had brought. It was a grant proposal. Federal assistance for historic preservation and veterans housing. He looked at Grace. What if Blackbriar became more than a museum? Walter raised an eyebrow. What are you thinking? Ethan smiled. A place where veterans who have nowhere else to go can start over. Grace's eyes widened. Claire slowly smiled. A place that keeps the original promise. Walter nodded. For military families. For homeless veterans. For anyone carrying burdens too heavy to carry alone. Ethan looked down at Titan. What do you think? Titan's tail swept once across the snow. The answer was obvious. Within weeks, volunteers began arriving. Some came after seeing the news. Others were veterans who recognized something of themselves in Ethan's story. Retired carpenters unloaded toolboxes. Electricians volunteered to restore wiring. Plumbers repaired ancient water lines. High school students spent weekends clearing weeds from sidewalks. A church group planted the first community garden beside the old schoolhouse. Blackbriar echoed with new sounds. Hammers, laughter, children, hope. The abandoned general store became the first restored building. Its shelves filled with donated groceries. Its fireplace burned every evening. No one who arrived hungry left hungry. Grace eventually closed her little highway diner. Not because business failed, because she insisted on opening a community kitchen inside Blackbriar instead. This place needs feeding more than the highway does, she said. Walter transformed one surviving building into a small historical museum. The recovered deed, Henry Collins's journals, copies of the restored county ledger, photographs of the original families. Every visitor learned the truth, not the comfortable version, the real one. Claire organized legal clinics for veterans struggling with housing, disability claims, and family paperwork. People drove hundreds of miles for appointments. She never charged anyone who couldn't afford it. Rachel Monroe visited every Thursday. Officially, she came to check on Titan. Unofficially, she treated every dog, horse, and stray cat that somehow found its way into Blackbriar. The town slowly became what it had once promised to be: a refuge, a beginning. One crisp autumn morning, Ethan walked to the entrance road carrying a freshly painted wooden sign. Several volunteers helped raise the heavy posts into the ground. Titan sat nearby, watching every movement. When the bolts were tightened, Ethan stepped back. The sign read, "Blackbriar Veterans Foundation." Placed to begin again, a quiet applause rose from the gathered crowd. An older Marine stepped forward. "I've been sleeping in my truck for 6 months." He looked around the town. "You got room for one more?" Ethan smiled. "We've got plenty." The veteran looked at Titan. "I've heard about you." Titan calmly walked over and rested against the man's leg. The Marine laughed through misty eyes. "I guess that's my welcome." "It is," Ethan said. As winter approached again, Blackbriar no longer felt abandoned. Smoke rose from restored chimneys. Porch lights glowed warmly at dusk. Fresh footprints crossed streets that had once known only silence. Standing outside the general store one evening, Ethan watched Titan greet each newcomer with the same quiet dignity he had shown throughout his years of service. The old German shepherd no longer searched for hidden secrets beneath forgotten buildings. His mission had changed. Now, he welcomed people home, and Ethan realized that perhaps this had been the true purpose behind every discovery, every scar, every impossible step that had brought them to Blackbriar. The town had not simply been saved. It had remembered who it was always meant to serve. 1 year later, the first light of dawn slipped across the Rocky Mountains, painting the peaks above Blackbriar with shades of gold and pale blue. Snow rested quietly on the rooftops. Thin curls of smoke rose from stone chimneys. The streets that had once echoed with nothing but wind now carried the gentle sounds of everyday life. A bakery opened its front door. A carpenter unlocked his workshop. Children laughed as they hurried toward the restored schoolhouse carrying backpacks nearly as large as they were. For the first time in generations, Blackbriar no longer looked like a forgotten place. It looked like home. Ethan Walker stood on the porch of the restored general store with a steaming mug of coffee warming his hands. The building that had once sheltered a homeless veteran now served as the heart of the Blackbriar Veterans Foundation. Maps covered one wall. Community notices filled another. Families gathered there each evening for shared meals, conversations, and quiet moments beside the stone fireplace that had once sat cold and abandoned. Ethan watched the town wake up. There had been mornings not so long ago when he wondered if he would ever find a reason to get out of bed. Now people knocked on his door before sunrise asking where they could help. Life had replaced silence. Purpose had replaced survival. A familiar set of paws crossed the wooden porch behind him. Titan walked more slowly than he once had. The deep scar along his shoulder remained visible beneath his thick coat. Cold mornings still made him limp for the first few steps, but his eyes had never lost their quiet strength. Ethan knelt beside him. "Morning, old soldier." Titan leaned gently against his shoulder. Neither needed words anymore. Together they walked down Main Street. Every few yards someone greeted them. "Morning, Ethan." "Morning, Titan." An elderly Army veteran swept snow from the sidewalk outside his newly restored cabin. A young couple planted evergreen saplings near the community garden. Grace Holloway waved from the kitchen window, where fresh bread cooled on wooden racks. "I made cinnamon rolls." Ethan laughed. "You make those every Friday. And you still act surprised every Friday." Walter Briggs emerged from the museum carrying a framed black and white photograph. "I finally finished restoring it." He handed it carefully to Ethan. The photograph showed the original Blackbriar families standing together nearly 75 years earlier. Children, minors, teachers, veterans. Near the back stood Sergeant Samuel Walker, younger than Ethan had ever imagined, standing proudly beside the town sign. Ethan stared quietly at the face of the grandfather he had never known. Walter smiled softly. "I thought he belonged here." Ethan nodded. "So do I." The photograph found its place inside the museum that afternoon. Beneath it rested Samuel's unfinished letter. Visitors often stopped there the longest. Many left quietly, wiping away tears. Others simply stood in silence, understanding. Outside the museum, another memorial had become the emotional center of the town. A simple granite wall listed the names of every service member connected to the original Blackbriar Community Trust. Some had returned home. Others never had. Fresh flowers appeared there almost every morning. No one knew exactly who left them. No one asked. It had become one of Blackbriar's quiet traditions. Titan visited the memorial every day. He would sit for several minutes facing the engraved names without moving. Visitors often joined him. Children learned not to interrupt. Even they somehow understood the old German shepherd was remembering people they had never met. Rachel Monroe parked outside the veterinary clinic. She now operated 2 days each week inside Blackbriar. She smiled as Titan approached. "Ready for your annual checkup?" Titan looked at Ethan, then slowly walked inside as though accepting a duty rather than an appointment. Rachel gently examined his shoulder. "The scar looks good." She scratched behind his ears. "You've earned retirement," Titan answered by walking directly back outside. Rachel laughed. "I'll take that as disagreement." "He still thinks he's working," Ethan said. "He is." Rachel watched Titan greeting another newly arrived veteran near the entrance sign. "He just has a different mission now." That afternoon, several buses arrived carrying veterans from neighboring states. Some came with families, some came alone. One man stepped off carrying everything he owned inside a single backpack. He paused uncertainly near the entrance. Titan walked straight toward him. The veteran knelt instinctively. The old German shepherd rested his head against the man's chest. The man closed his eyes. For a long moment he simply held onto Titan's neck. When he finally stood, tears had filled his eyes. "I haven't felt welcome anywhere in years." Ethan extended his hand. "You are now." Construction continued throughout the seasons. The restored school welcomed children from nearby ranches. A woodworking shop trained veterans beginning new careers. The community garden produced enough vegetables to share with neighboring towns. On weekends, families gathered beside the restored creek, where abandoned mining equipment had once rusted in silence. Blackbriar had become more than a place people visited. It had become a place people believed in. One evening, as winter settled once again across the mountains, the entire community gathered outside the town hall. Lanterns lined the sidewalks. Fresh snow reflected their warm light across the street. Grace handed Ethan a small wrapped package. "Open it." Inside rested a wooden sign carefully carved by local volunteers. The letters were simple, strong, handmade. Ethan looked up. "You want me to hang it?" Walter smiled. "It belongs at the entrance." The entire town walked together through the falling snow toward the road where everything had begun. The old sign welcoming travelers to Blackbriar had been restored months earlier. Now one final piece remained. Ethan fastened the carved board beneath it. It read, "No one who served is ever forgotten." No speeches followed. None were needed. The words said enough. As the crowd quietly returned toward town, Ethan remained standing beside the sign. Titan sat faithfully at his side. The mountains stretched endlessly beyond them. 1 year earlier, Ethan had arrived with $800, an aging pickup truck, and a heart burdened by memories he believed would never loosen their grip. The nightmares had not disappeared. Some nights they still came. Some mornings were still difficult. PTSD had not simply vanished because life became better, but it no longer defined every sunrise. Purpose had become stronger than pain. Community had become stronger than loneliness. Hope had become stronger than fear. Ethan rested one hand on Titan's scarred shoulder. "You brought me here." Titan looked toward the lights of Blackbriar glowing warmly beneath the snow. The old German shepherd wagged his tail once, slowly, contentedly, as though he had known from the very beginning what neither of them could yet see. The treasure had never been hidden beneath the floorboards. It had never been locked inside forgotten deeds or buried within old journals. The real treasure had always been the people waiting for someone brave enough to believe they were worth finding again. High above the valley, the first stars appeared over the Rocky Mountains. Below them, Blackbriar shone with life. A town once abandoned, a promise finally kept, and two old soldiers, one man and one loyal dog, who had discovered that sometimes the longest journey home begins with nothing more than $800, unwavering loyalty, and the courage to take one more step into the unknown. The end. If this story reminded you that honor and integrity are always worth protecting, type yes in the comments. And let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to see how far this community reaches. If stories about justice, resilience, and everyday heroes mean something to you, subscribe and join us for the next unforgettable journey across the land of the free.